gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is DebateSensei, NPDA edition, where we talk about things relevant to competitive college debate in the National Parliamentary Debate Association. I have a director of debate from San Diego State University, me, Kyle Pryor-Landon. Thank you, Kyle, for being with me.
Thanks for having me again, Jared.
Yeah, excellent. So I didn't point out last time that we're both hyphenated. So I thought that would be a nice lighthearted way to get started. How'd you pick up your hyphen?
My parents weren't married.
Oh,
Yeah, so they were like, you know what, you're getting both.
oh,
So yeah, I am
cool.
not married. So I wish I had a more exciting story. But how'd you get yours?
Got married, so I added mine on when I was 20 something. Yeah,
Sweet.
I'm up on 25. So yeah, I'm about to celebrate the 20th pretty soon.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, so this is gonna be funny because I don't think we're gonna air these episodes in order. And so I shaved this weekend because I was going as Ken to the Oscars. We had a little Oscars party, and I had a pink jacket on, and so I thought I'd kind of shave and look the part. I could grow it back in a couple weeks. So yeah, it's all right. It's all right. It's not my best look. All right. I wanted to. We talk a lot with other debate associations, and I love the contrast between them and the comparisons as well. But the contrast is what's really interesting, and critical debate is something that was definitely imported from other debate formats into NPDA. And I was kind of there as that importation process was happening, right? We were definitely like way more of a versatile debate format. You were expected to have different affirmatives for every single round and stuff like that. And so I'm really interested in comparing not only between other associations, but between your understanding and what my understanding is, because I think that's really interesting. So that's going to be the sort of focus. All right.
Perfect.
With that being said, let's take a big picture approach first. How were you taught the sort of overarching role and function of a critique in Parley?
Yeah, I was taught critiques as just another neg strategy. I know that, right, critiques generally, like in policy, right, have very specific functions, where you know have like very specific critiques of rhetoric. You have very specific critiques of methodology, right?
Yeah.
I think in NPDA, people just kind of use Ks as like here's something I'm going to get very familiar with,
Yeah.
and use that as a strategy to increase neg flexibility. That was kind of my understanding of critiques for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Was yeah, I will read this book, I will understand this literature, and I will read this argument, and I will endorse something, rather than the generic policy making world. That was kind of like my understanding for a while. I've kind of taken a different stance towards it now. I think that the specific things you are advocating for in critiques do matter. And they're not so much of a just kind of catch-all, I don't really want to debate this topic thing that you do. I think that the things really do matter. And I think that shift changed when I actually started diving into the K literature a lot more than I was previously, and really understanding the implications of what you're actually arguing for. I don't know what your thoughts are with that.
And so it was another neg strategy, and it was on the level of almost like a procedural, because everything was sort of pre-fiat, but it was like a different treatment of it where it was a critique of fiat was integral into everything. Is that still like a major part of the framework debate, the construction? Are you getting up there and you're like, all right, let's talk a little bit about fiat and let's talk about
the way I lecture, or tell my students, right, is like there's always some bit about policymaking and fiat being bad,
Mm-hmm.
98% of the time, I would say, right, every K is like some function of the AF, right? And I'm assuming we're going to put aside AF Ks for a second.
Yeah.
But, you know, some function of the AF, right? The policymaking world of the AF is bad, right? We offer a different way of viewing the world, right? A different ontology or epistemological orientation towards the world. And also, fiat is bad and the things we do in round matter.
Okay.
That's kind of most frameworks, just with slightly different flavors, depending on
With
your.
the slightly different flavors is like is the so I am a little interested in structurally if it is the same, because I haven't really lectured on critiques in a really long time, haven't watched a debate in a really long time.
Yeah.
Whenever I come back and I watch them, I'm like, oh yeah, it's pretty much the same, but I still want to keep updated.
Yeah.
So in the framework, it was always a sort of critique of fiat, but then it was also some sort of philosophical epistemological framework, like way of viewing the world. And it was like,
Yeah.
I guess that the framework, the subpoint A of the critique, was always a two-parter. Is that the same way for you?
Yeah, I mean, frameworks have kind of gotten, like, the scope creep on framework has kind of expanded over time.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
because I think that, right, the way I view framework, I think they're very, like, important to win, right? I think you could probably
Yeah.
win a day without winning the framework.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe. Most of the time, no. In my experience, judging and competing, right, the winning the framework is pretty much how you win the rest of the debate, right? If you
Right.
can win that policy making is bad, you're probably not going to want to vote for the AF,
Mhm.
right? Um, I think that the reason that framework has kind of expanded beyond just, right, fiat bad, policy making bad, is in response to more, like, soft left, right, AFs that kind of also focus on proximal impacts,
Mm.
right? Because generally, right, like K's, right, the framework level of the K, right, will tell you, right, why it's important, right? A role of the judge, a role of the ballot, right? Vote for the team with the best ethical
Right,
voting,
right. Yeah. The
whatever.
role of the ballot, that is definitely something I think is an addition since I was debating. That is a large sort of part of it. And I do see how that would be part of the framework debate. It would be appropriate there. And you have to, and that one does offer, I don't know, you could really adapt that from topic to topic, the role of the ballot, right? And I think that's,
Sure.
I don't know, kind of, yeah, it does add some depth to the overall argument. And I think you can be creative with that as well.
Mhm.
Like every round that you have, you're kind of explaining why this one is a uniquely suitable round to make this sort of statement. And like I never really was able to get into that much, but I could see how people would really, like experiment with that section of the critique in each round in order to kind of make it like, would you call it topical adjacent? It was that your frame? Yeah.
I mean, I think that kind of comes in the links, right? If we're moving
Okay.
down, right, to make sure that you're. I don't know if the framework is necessarily, like, if you need to contextualize it to the topic. I think that, like, benefits, right? I have maybe a more progressive view of Ks, that I don't think the framework needs to be contextualized. I think the links need to be contextualized, right? I think links of emission are pretty weak on Ks.
Mm.
But I think on the framework level, right, you can just writ large say policymaking, right, and or using the USFG as an actor, or, right, working under capitalism, right, whatever, again, your flavor of critique is, usually makes sense, right? Generally, people aren't reading, like, the AF is
Yeah.
generally kind of what it's going to be, right? You can kind of predict the AF most of the time.
Yeah.
Right, the resolution pretty much tells you what the AF's asking for. I think the difference, though, in, like, the kind of framework arms race is the proliferation of underviews on the
Okay.
AF.
Okay. Okay. That
Yeah,
is something new. Tell me about underviews. What do you typically have in those?
yeah. So an underview is AF framework, right?
Oh.
So instead of
Oh.
reading, like, a detailed top of case, so like Nat Circuit
Huh.
NPDA, right? The top of case has pretty much shriveled and died to just reading the resolution and the plan.
Okay.
which is fine. But then you spread through your 5 minutes of your 3 advantages, right? And then you, at the bottom of it, right, you read an interp, right? So the role of the ballot is to vote for the team with the best post-fiat policy option that materially changes the status quo, right? And then you read a bunch of reasons why fiat's good and policymaking's good, right? Instead of doing that work in the MG, you shift that work to say in the PMC. So now the MG just has to make those cross applications.
Oh
So the
man.
arms race
Oh
for
god.
framework has blown up frameworks in NPDA, right?
Okay. So the critique has now shifted MG arguments into the PMC. The 2A arguments are in the 1AC. Oh my god.
Yes.
Oh wow.
So it's strategically beneficial, right? Because then you can kind of make those comparisons and like we said it first, right? You're going to be preferring the AF's roll of the ballot, that you should prefer the best post fiat policy option versus the NEG's endorsement of historical materialism, right?
So okay. Has anyone just tried going like, oh man, the U.S. government's horrible. That's like a horrible history of U.S. government. But man, you know what'd be nice is if they did this policy right there, and they're like, "What are you talking about? I'm not fiating anything. I'm just saying that would be nice." Like, is that not an option? Am I stupid? Am I oversimplifying this?
I mean, it certainly is an option.
Okay.
Right? I don't think there's anything wrong with saying like the USFG is a bad actor.
Yeah.
And it is had.
Yeah.
I don't. I also don't see why like actor counter plans have like fully vanished. They've almost entirely, completely vanished.
Mm.
At least in my experience.
The alternate agent, the alternate actor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
alternative
Okay.
actor, right? Because I think that.
Legit now or what?
Sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
They just considered illegit now.
Yeah, I mean it's just kind of not the meta.
Oh.
Right. Like just no one's really saying like, maybe Canada should do this instead, right? That was like my favorite REM mining counter plan. It's no, Canada has way better labor laws.
Yeah.
Which
consult? Do they still do consult? Or
no, consult's pretty much died off.
what?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't really hear a whole lot of counter plans anyways. I think if people are going to read counter plans, they are like, well, then I might as well just read an alternative.
So I think kind of like taking over. Like you started off saying this was just another negative strategy. Has it become the negative strategy?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. Nat circuit, I'm going to say probably. PSCFA tournaments, no, not even remotely. There's a general kind of, maybe this is more state of the union address type things, but like, the PSCFA is very anti-K. Mm-hmm. Most of the tournaments that I go to, I very rarely hear a K, and I'm probably one of the judges that you would want to read a K in front of in the PSCFA, right? And no one's doing it. I mean, a couple people are, but not at nearly the level that they've proliferated to at the national level. And I think, right, that comes down to norm setting, right? A lot of teams are winning nationals on Ks or making it to final rounds on Ks, right? And especially rejecting the topic is really popular, right? Reading a critique on the AF. Also very popular in Nat Circuit. I don't think I've ever seen it at a PSCFA tournament. But yeah, I certainly don't think it's the only neg strat. I think there's plenty of teams out there who still read disads and still read counter plans and still read case offense. I think the disad though itself is kind of moving itself out. More and more judges are like disads on their own are pretty weak. I don't necessarily agree, but I think that that's kind of emblematic, right, of this whole linear disad plus alternative as a solvency thing, rather than just saying like, no, the status quo is fine. Right. I think that the burdens have kind of shifted where nobody can really admit that the status quo is probably fine. And I maybe that's a political shift in who's doing debate. Maybe that's a mental shift, maybe that has, I mean, there's so many external factors as to why that could be. I don't know if I have a satisfactory answer for that. Um,
Well, what if it's just like games theory? It's like it's a very low risk and unpredictable sort of strategy that you can do, and that's what's doing it. What do you, like? I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here. What do you think?
I mean, I think there's a certain level of like proliferation that comes from that, right?
Yeah.
That it's very strategically viable. You can just kick out of an alternative if you want to, and there was no harm done, right?
Yeah.
The neg still gets the status quo at the end of the day, right? Depending on your view of condo and burdens, right? But the neg still gets the status quo. So like if you just read a K and case answers and then you kick out of your K and collapse to case answers, I mean that's a perfectly viable strategy, and you've also wasted 8 minutes of the MG.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So I'm hearing a lot. Let's shift a little bit to AFKs. You kind
Yeah.
of touching upon it, but how are they different? And like a lot of these questions I'm asking, it's not like I've never heard of this before. It's kind of like I just want to hear your take on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like how would you explain the difference between running a critique on the affirmative rather than the neg?
Yeah. I mean, I think KAFs are unequivocally cheating.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know you were that blunt. All right, let's do
Yeah,
it.
no, I mean, I think they're unequivocally cheating. That's
Okay.
not to say that they're not strategic.
Okay.
Right? Like I will sit there and I will listen to a KAF round, right? And I'm totally fine with it, right? I'm not going to throw a hissy fit. I'm not going to like, how dare you read it AFK? Like it's the AF's burden, right? That's not. I just think that they're cheating, right?
Okay.
I think that the AF has to uphold the resolution, otherwise I'm not really sure why we have resolutions in the first place. But like, sure, maybe some topics are so vehemently bad that you would feel horrible defending it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what it started out as, right? Like, I don't want to defend the actions of the USFG.
Right.
Sure, I don't want to role play as the USFG.
Right.
I get it. I think they've since kind of turned into, again, I don't want to affirm this topic.
Yeah.
Which again is probably fine. But yeah, the AF's job is to uphold the resolution. I've seen some teams try to massage the plan into their advocacy.
Okay. Right. Right.
But I don't think you get to advocacies,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't think the AF can just sever out of advocacies, which, I think the KAF is probably pretty good,
Okay.
probably pretty useful.
Okay.
But yeah, I think framework T, I don't know, it's just a great argument.
So the we did have some people that were experimenting with affirmative Ks
Mhm.
back 20 freaking years ago. The hot one at the time, it's gonna make me sound dated, was the statism critique. You know what I mean? And so and now I'm like, man, I doubt anyone is that just does anyone even know about that? Does anybody go for that, or is it all just cap Marxism?
I mean, it's a decent amount of cap, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
would say last year, right? I mean, Nationals is next week, or I guess the end of this week, um, as of filming.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I guess, TBD, but I mean, most of them are still kind of cap, right? There's a
Yeah.
couple out there that are different, right? It's, but yeah, I mean, I still think cap is very much in the meta of debate right now, especially Marxist Leninism, Maoism,
Mhm.
or MLM, right? That seems to be the K du jour, of my time. But I mean, still, right? There's like Fem Rage still makes its appearance every once in a while, or like Fem Killjoy.
Okay.
Um, you know, wasn't a huge fan of that one. I just, I think like FemIR kind of comes around every once in a while. Some people will pull some like things out of back files. I'm like, where did you get that from? And it's like, oh yeah, we got this from Lewis and Clark 10 years ago. Right. And so like, I think, I mean, there is variety.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, Afro-pessimism, anti-blackness,
Yeah.
Afrofuturism.
A lot of that.
So every once in a while, come back up. But yeah, I mean, it's mostly cap. You're right.
So, all right. This is more of a hypothetical, but
Sure.
if it originally started off as like, hey, here's another sort of variety of argument, and at what point do we kind of go, it looks like it's crowding out all these other strategies? You know what I mean? I mean, is the critique a project? And how do we know when that project is succeeding or failing? You know what I mean? Like, what's the like? How do you? I don't know. Like, I've been watching it for 20 years, and I'm like all these arguments that I'm listening to, and it seems to kind of just go in cycles. It doesn't seem to move forward like it claims to do. I don't know. What's your take?
I was thinking about this a lot last night.
Yeah.
You were telling me that, we're going to talk about the K. And I was like, okay, well, what do I figured this was going to be one of the things that got brought up, right? Is that Ks kind of come and go.
Yeah.
And then they come back and then they go away again. I think that part of that, right, comes from NPDA's coach prep. Right. I think that, right. So I will give my students the Ks that I read or the Ks that my coaches gave to me. Right. And so I've got Ks that I kind of wrote. I've got Ks that, my coaches wrote. I've got Ks from open source playbooks from 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That I can kind of all pull together and pull from and pull out of. Right. And I think that, right, when as a coach, right, it's like, well, I don't know, you want to be critical? Here's the K I wrote 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right. See what you can do with that. Right. And I think that maybe that's an over reliance on back files that, right, NPDA was supposed to do away with.
Yeah.
But also is probably inevitable.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's no way to be like, you can't have files.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, I think the reason they come and go is because, right, everyone reads cap, everyone makes answers to cap, then everyone switches to something else. And then by the time everyone's forgotten about it, they're like, oh, well, let's do cap again. And then everyone rewrites their answers to cap. And then now everyone, right. And so it comes and goes. Right. And I think we're kind of seeing that now that cap's kind of saturated the market. That's ironic. But right, that okay, every team now has blocks and blocks and blocks of cap answers, right? For every single alternative.
So debate, okay. Debate used to be known as the place that always just talked about nuclear war. It still is known as the place that always just talks about nuclear war.
Sure.
Is it now the place that's all known for always talking about capitalism?
Probably at the national circuit, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also emblematically, right, we've kind of shifted away from big stick impacts in a little bit of a way, right? Everything kind of gets terminalized eventually to death.
Right.
But I think we're moving towards a lot more proximal impacts and soft left AFs. Just because people are starting to gut check a lot more arguments, which I'm not sure is a good thing. And I will go on a limb and say maybe it's because of IPDA. But I think that, right, a lot more judges are willing, especially local circuit judges, are willing to intervene and say, this doesn't sound right to me. Right? I don't understand how passing a new farm bill could lead to nuclear war.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think truth over tech is good for debate because that begs the question of what truth is in the first place, right? There's no evidence. There's no cards, right? You can't Google things in round, right? So all you have to go on then is what you're presented with and the strength of the argument, right? where I'm starting to get concerned is that kind of proliferation in Ks, where we're just kind of Frankensteining literature together to make it kind of sound coherent.
Right.
And then you're like, well, no one's ever really advocated for this ever.
Okay. Yeah. And so now, like, what literature base are you really pulling from in order to, yeah, to support whatever your advocacy is?
Yeah.
It starts questioning. Okay. Okay. I can see
Yeah.
that.
So we're not really like moving the goalposts, so to speak, right? We're just kind of like, where are we getting, where's this K coming from? Right, is kind of the question that I've been asking myself, right? Like I will still try my hardest to not intervene.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't want to strike me at NPDA, I don't intervene. Um, but on occasion, right, it's like I don't think Deleuze was arguing for this.
Oh. Oh.
You
Gotcha.
know, like
Gotcha.
I'm just not sure. Like,
Yeah.
and sure, I'll evaluate it as it comes out in the debate. But you know, then I'm left sitting there with, okay, well, if I vote for this K, right, that signals to them, right, that like every ballot, right, is essentially a signification of support for that,
Yeah.
right. So the more ballots that this keeps winning, right, the more that you're allowed to just kind of get away with saying things that maybe aren't good or true. Um, and you know, I hear a lot of talk about, and like, I mean, I'm included in this talk about identity in Ks.
Uh-huh.
And I think that that's a very nuanced discussion. You know, I think, you know, we can talk about that for 4 hours.
Right.
You know, but I'm not sure if that's also necessarily a good thing for being able to be an impartial judge, right? I think that debate, again, the arms race has necessitated reading truisms sometimes, right? Or tautologies that make it really hard to evaluate.
Right.
Right, from a judging perspective, right? Where it's I'm having to now decide on specific bits of your identity as offense or defense against some philosophy argument.
Right. So these
That's
like in policy and NFALD, they you get to read their authors and what they're saying, and this is like the common knowledge standard is so vague, but at like comparing it to this, which is like you get to craft a brand new sort of idea, and now people are just supposed to react to it basically, you know what I mean, on the neg. You know, it's like they get 7 minutes to kind of figure out what your intent is behind it and come up with a response. And I'm like, so is that like the improvement to debate? Is that what is happening here? Is it you're calling this you know, a step up?
I mean, I think Ks are good.
Yeah.
Right. I will say that like I am fully in support of the existence of critiques and debate.
Yeah.
I think that, however, we aren't looking at them in the way that right they've transformed in meaning,
Yeah.
right? And I think I, I am very anti people saying right like critiques are inaccessible or critiques are you know like elitist, right? I don't think that that's true, and I'm happy to expand on that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I think like all these other strategies went through the same thing. Like you had to prepare for topicality a lot too. You know what I mean? And people would run crappy versions of that, and you know, they would hijack debates, and like it was, you know, a strategy and not an exploration of, you know, like genuine arguments or anything like that. So like I think that like there you have the guilty violations of that on disadvantages and on counterplans, and you know, it's
right.
like all those things like have the practice of it. You know what I mean? What I'm wondering is if what we're calling like this is the best of the best. Um, what are, I mean, what is that saying about the, you know?
Yeah. So um, I think that some of the debate infighting that's happening right between NPDA, IPDA, and then now TPDA, right?
Oh, is that
Yeah,
team IPDA? Is
Team
that what?
IPDA,
Oh, okay.
right? And I think that this is more of, right, a very reactionary wing of debate that's, I don't want to adapt to a new meta. I want to do, right, like publicly accessible debate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, sure, I think that there is a space for publicly accessible debate, right? I think that that is something that should exist. And I think that is something that is beneficial. But I think that they're different activities. And I think that inevitably, right, all of these, every debate format that has come since policy, right, since CETA, has been a response to increasing speed, increasing technicality, and increasing critiques.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so then they said, okay, well, we're going to make NPDA, and that's not going to have speed or technicality or critiques. And for a while, it didn't. And then now it does, right? So then, like, okay, we're going to make IPDA. And then I've noticed an uptick in IPDA where people are getting faster, they're getting more technical, and they're starting to get more critical.
Yeah.
Right. And so then now it's like, okay, well, let's create Team IPDA that's not going to have any of these problems, right? Like, it's the, or I put problems in scare quotes.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, like the idea of like carcinization, that like all mollusks, or not mollusks, but all, like, you know, sea insects will inevitably like come back into the form of a crab.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Right.
Everything, yeah, it comes back to that.
I think debate has a very similar thing, right? I think that the natural tendency is to get faster, more technical, and more critical, because that's just what the people from the previous debate format know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So if I'm judging IPDA, right, and somebody reads a K in IPDA in front of me and they don't use the jargon or whatever, right, I'm like, okay, yeah, cool, that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I get it. I'll vote for that. Right. So I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I just think we're kind of maladjusting to it, and looking for answers in the wrong place.
Yeah. So this is more of a, when you're talking about going for like stock issues, like, oh, I think the status quo is just fine. It's not always about that it's being just fine, but whether or not the next stage will be an improvement. And so now the question is, it's like, has debate improved since the critique has taken a larger, seems like it's kind of taken the place of it. It makes me kind of sad sometimes, because it's the one argument that directly addresses some of the inequities in the activity, and then it doesn't. I can't point to a single thing in the last 20 years. I'm like, yeah, that's been a real big change or something like that. You know what I mean? In our activity.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think that debate has improved technically. However, you could look at declining attendance at both NPDA and NPTE, and rising attendance in IPDA nationals.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's a nationals. Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that, right, from a technical standpoint, I don't think debate has declined in its ability. I think that, I mean, I think that there's, right, obviously external factors besides the criticism that have varied the level of participation at the national tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I think funding primarily. Right? You know, it's just hard for schools to fund a forensics program. You got to travel across the nation 3 or 4 times a year. Right. That costs a lot of money to schools that are constantly having budget cuts. Right. And I think that we're looking for solutions. Right. And we're like, no, it's technical debate. It's fast debate. Right. But when debate was technical and fast, in, you know, still in like 2011, 2012, there were still 200 teams going to NPDA. Right. Mm-hmm. It's not. And still, like CETA, there's still people competing in CETA. Right. Like it's not. I don't think that's necessarily an indict of the ability. I think it's just more of, or the quality of debate. I just think it's more of an indict of the funding priorities have changed for administrators. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
We want to give more money to math department than the comm department.
Well, it's a lot of these issues have been talked about this in the same way for years and years and years. And so, I was looking for a little bit of perspective on, people who've been, are still like really in the thick of it and going. So this is what NPDA is coming up really, really quick, huh?
Yeah. NPDA is this Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Okay, so we're filming this on March 12th, so yeah, we're probably going to be posting this right afterwards. All right. Well, I hope to talk to you again after NPDA, get a little
Yeah,
bit
of
of
course.
feedback on what's happening. So, Kyle, thank you so much for
Thanks.
giving your insight.
Of course.